it's all to do with strategies. Looking at the airlines is really interesting. Very challenging market. We'll look at Ryanair today as well. And we can see Ryanair today is actually facing a lot of challenges because of fuel prices. But we'll start with the context, at least, of the case study. It gives us a starting point. Anyway, so today we're going to talk quickly about two chapters of Johnson et al., and then we'll talk about Ryanair, an interesting case study looking at strategy in action. So very practical. So an interesting aspect of strategy at the higher level is corporate strategy, and from a corporate perspective, diversifying. We see in this university there's diversification across different faculties, but also trying to diversify in terms of businesses, where we see the Macquarie Private Hospital as an example. So many large organizations try and diversify, and often with a lack of success, because there's an expression about sticking to the knitting, stick to what you know best. And often they diversify and they don't add value. And there's some very interesting models as to when it makes sense to diversify and what value does a corporate, does a parent actually deliver. So let's have a look at it from Johnson and Scholes. And you can read the learning outcomes yourself here. And so in terms of strategic directions at the corporate level is how broad to make the portfolio. How big do we want to become? One criticism of General Electric is that it's become too big, too unwieldy, in fact. And from corporate parenting, how does the parent actually add value to the subsidiaries? Or is it only adding red tape? Is it only adding bureaucracy? And what strategic business units should the corporation invest in terms of the portfolio? Like in ITIC 871, we talked about the IT portfolio model, that the projects are in a portfolio of support, key operational, strategic, or high potential. Similarly, and that's why it maps to the Boston Consulting Group's 2x2 matrix, of problem child and star, cash cow and dog. That's why it maps, because it's also a portfolio approach here. So how do we structure our portfolio? So in terms of the directions we can take, we can look at our existing products and services in our existing markets and try and drive share, increase market share. We can look at new products to our existing market. That's a very good idea. Or we can look at our existing products to new markets, or new products to new markets. And an example that we'll look at, I want you to look at, is Wesfarmers. So Wesfarmers is the largest Australian company by revenue at $63 billion. It's the country's largest private employer, 205,000 employees. It was a cooperative originally to provide goods and services to Western Australian farmers. So it's called Wesfarmers. Western Australian farmers in 1914. It was listed on the Australian Stock Exchange in 1984. So, if we look at existing products to existing markets, Wesfarmers owns Bunnings, created Bunnings. That's why it's such a large employer. So Bunnings was able to successfully compete against Woolworths Masters, and Woolworths Masters had to close its doors. So Bunnings continues to grow market share, supplying its existing products and services to its existing markets. It opens up more stores, more products, and sells more. So that's been very successful. if we look at what Wesfarmers does in terms of new products to existing, so the existing market being Australian consumers, they own Target and Officeworks. So Officeworks was a new venture for them, and that's an Australian retail market. In Kmart, they added Kmart Tire and Auto. They added Harris Technology, which is computer technology. So they started up a lot of new businesses, new products and services to the existing market. Woolworths tried the same with Masters, something new to the existing market, and failed. Whereas Wesfarmers seems to understand their market a lot better. Officeworks is like the Bunnings in office consumables. Anybody visited the Officeworks shop? It's one on Epping Road here. So it's open very long hours, very wide range, very good value, very successful. So that's an example of new products and services to the existing market. In terms of new markets, they look at overseas penetration in New Zealand, in India, New Caledonia, in the UK, China, Bermuda, Singapore. So for an Australian, a large multi-billion-dollar Australian company, they have a lot of opportunity here in market development. Trump is creating huge problems because he doesn't want American companies to do business in China. China is the world's number 2 economy, and one day will be the number 1 world economy. And how are they supposed to diversify if they can't enter in? In fact, in the trade talks, he should be talking about the opposite. How to gain better access for American companies to the Chinese market, which is probably where the negotiations will head. Because the talk about stopping American companies doing business in China is enormously counterproductive for the global economy, but for American companies, and they're just ignoring him anyway. In terms of conglomerate diversification, this is acquisition and sale. So as an interesting point, Wesfarmers used to have a lot of coal mines, and they sold all their coal mines. They acquired the workwear group of Pacific Brands. So Pacific Brands is Bonds, and they acquired the workwear component of that. They've got a 50% interest in a company called Gresham Investments, 50% interest in Western Pine Plantations, and they sold their insurance broker, and they sold Coles, which is really interesting too. So they had acquired Coles Myer, and Coles Myer spun off into Myer, became privatized, and they sold Coles in an IPO, initial public offering in 2018. They still retain 15% of Coles. So in this diversification, the board of Wesfarmers is looking for always opportunities, and where they see in their portfolio they have to exit, because coal they decided maybe was a dirty fuel and didn't have good long-term prospects. Nobody could dispute that with global warming, and so it made sense and didn't fit in terms of a consumer-friendly company involved in coal mine polluting, because coal is essentially a greenhouse gas creator. Digging up that coal and burning it only destroys the climate further. So that's the interesting example. So diversification, increasing the range of products. Related diversification can be product, services, relationships to existing businesses, or can be unrelated. That's the example I've given. And market penetration, increasing share, such as Bunnings increasing its market share. But there are constraints, of course. You have retaliation from competitors. Woolworths entered the hardware business with Masters, but couldn't do it as well as Bunnings. They successfully defended their turf. Certainly, the legal restraint is there's no problem in you increasing your market share, but you can't acquire your competitors if that results in less competition in the market. It's antitrust. It's called antitrust legislation. It's in all developed countries. We have it, and prevents companies from buying out their competition and creating a monopoly. And it can be, of course, economic constraints too. Our banks are having a lot of trouble at the moment because of the economic constraints in growing their market. So if we think about the economic constraints on banks, can anybody think of what is impacting on them at the moment? We're not in a recession, no. So how do banks make money? What about interest? Loans. So how does a bank make money on loans? And where do they get their money from? Some money from depositors, and some money they get from where else? Investment from overseas money markets. And they make a margin, don't they? The difference between what they can borrow money for compared to what they can lend it out for. That's their business model. So what are the economic constraints on banks at the moment? Interest rates. Interest rates are dropping. So why is that a problem for banks? They do, and why? Yeah, you're on the right track. It's the margin, you see. So when interest rates drop, they have to pay depositors. They end up paying depositors lower rates because they're expected to reduce their lending rates. But if the rate they pay depositors is too low, depositors refuse to use term deposits and savings accounts. Because I walked past the Commonwealth Bank today and they were advertising term deposit rate 1.55%. And that was in big poster in the window. Like, hey, 1.55% if you lock your money away with us in a term deposit. Oh, woohoo, who's queuing up for that? So people put their money in other things, other investments, when bank interest rates are very low. So they have trouble attracting funds, they have to pay more, and so their margins are actually squeezed in an environment of lowering interest rates. And someone who said recession, it's because our Reserve Bank is fearing a recession that they're lowering interest rates, setting interest rates lower. Well, Sayed's talking about the other side of the coin. So first of all, in a lower interest rate environment, margins are squeezed. We all understand that? Then do they make it up because people want to borrow? Because you can borrow these days. The going rate, say, for a residential home loan is about 3.4%. Variable rate, and Reserve Bank's going to reduce rates tomorrow. It's expected by, 25 basis points and maybe 50 basis points, and that means that the banks are expected to be something with a 2%, 2 point something in terms of what they're lending, right? Let's say around 3. They pass on most of the 50 basis points. So at 3%, you'd go, oh, I can borrow this money and go and invest it. Where do we like investing in Australia? No, well, we don't. We like property. We like property, but ASX could be, the stock exchange could be. another area, but you won't get 3.4% to borrow to invest in the stock market, because that's very high risk and the interest rate will be much higher. So you get that low interest rate based on residential housing because the bank takes a mortgage, takes security, right? But the banks have just had a Royal Commission, and APRA, the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority, has limited them in how they can loan, because APRA has criticised the banks that you've been engaging in too many dodgy loans. So they're very severely restricted now. And so lending criteria are very strict because they don't want to be fined by APRA, the regulatory authority. Our banks are very highly regulated. That's why in the financial crisis in 2007, when we had the collapse of Lehman Brothers, and we had all of the big US banks and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, these very funny institutions, funny names, who were very big home lenders as well. They were quasi-government institutions. They all needed to be bailed out by the US government. None of our banks required any government funds. We didn't even have a recession in Australia because our banks are very highly regulated. They couldn't engage in the toxic mortgage-backed securities that the American banks were doing. They had ninja loans in America. You don't know what a ninja loan is? No income, no assets, no job. No income, no assets, no job, and you get a loan? That's a ninja loan. And that's how they became toxic, these mortgage-backed securities, because prices stopped rising and people found very quickly they were underwater, which meant that they owed more on their property than the property was worth. That means the property is underwater. So the answer there is just declare bankruptcy and walk away. Walk away from all your debts. And there was a very successful business was clearing out houses of people who had just declared bankruptcy and walked away from the whole lot. And the banks couldn't sell the houses because the property market was collapsing, and then the banks were all failing. So, now that didn't happen here because we're tightly regulated. So that's an example of an economic constraint. So our big banks are economically constrained at the moment because of the lowering interest rate environment and a heavy regulatory environment, restraining their ability to grow their loan portfolios. So not only do we like to diversify, do we like to add new businesses, but sometimes we have to do the work, the opposite. We have to consolidate and retrench. And Wesfarmers sold off their coal mines, and they sold off Coles. Supermarkets, they decided they didn't want to be, they probably looked at the margins. They're probably very clever, because Coles is being assailed by Aldi with a different business model. For years, decades, it was pretty much a duopoly between Coles and Woolworths, and we had some smaller independent IGA, smaller supermarkets, but they were never very successful. And they used what was clever at the time was they had branded items which were very expensive, which they made a good margin on, and the manufacturer made a margin on, good margin, and they were heavily advertised. Our big brands, Kellogg's and Arnott's and SPC, baked beans, hungry human beings. Brands, they're advertised, right? So they had the branded product, and then they had the home brand, the low-cost one, but the low-cost one was of very variable quality. Sometimes it was okay and sometimes not okay. And so what they were training consumers was, well, you can take a risk with this crappy product that we have at the bottom shelf here that's low cost, or you can have the reliable brand, right? So they were quite cozy with that for many years until Aldi came along. Aldi with their hybrid strategy of value and quality, like H&M. Value and quality, the two coming together, and Aldi has shaken them up because Aldi products are of similar quality as are branded and never at the price, half to two-thirds the price. And they haven't got an answer for that. They can't reduce the cost of the branded product because they don't control that cost. That cost comes from the manufacturer, and they only can add their margin to it. They can't bring up the quality of their own product because they haven't got Aldi's capabilities in global sourcing, global supply chains. They haven't got Aldi's mentality of quality and value. Their value is cheap and nasty. That's how they got value. By cutting cost, Aldi looks at quality. So Wesfarmers, seeing the problem of Aldi, that Aldi will only but erode market share, sold Coles. Got rid of Coles with an IPO, and Coles has been bumping along, struggling since its IPO. So that's an example of retrenchment, knowing when to sell. This is what's probably gotten many organizations in trouble, like this university. We're in trouble because of the private hospital. It's just a sink for millions of dollars of loss every year. And they haven't got an exit plan. They probably will have to sell it in the end, at the end of the day, probably way too late, after far too high a loss, and sell it to the Ramsay Group, to a group who knows how to run a private hospital. It's an alien business. You'll see from the McKinsey model that you should get rid of alien businesses. But too many reputations get attached, too much politics. If you look at it from an objective way, for instance, when you buy and sell shares, you buy shares in a company and the shares go up in price, you get paid a dividend, and you're smiling, right? What you don't want is, one of our biggest companies is BHP. Have you heard of BHP, Broken Hill Proprietary? But it also stands for a stock trading strategy, BHP. Does anybody know what that is? Buy, hold, and pray. So buy, hold, and pray is very bad because it may not go up, may go down. So every large loss that a stock trader has ever made once started as a small loss. And just got bigger and bigger and bigger. So the strategic approach, the sensible management approach, is to understand this is a loser and to cut the loss, as Wesfarmers does with their coal mines, with Coles. Woolworths had to do it far too late with Masters. Masters warned them, you're rolling out the stores too fast. You haven't proven the model yet. You haven't got the formula working yet. No, we know what we're doing. We're so clever. We're Woolworths. We understand retail, blah, blah, blah. And they took a huge hit, huge loss, billion-dollar size loss, when they finally had to close all their master stores. And guess who picked up some of the best sites? Who do you think picked up some of the best sites? Bunnings, yeah. Oh, we don't mind a store there. That's a good fit out that we'll get at no money at all. No cost, because we'll take the lease off your hands. But we'll get everything else for free. We'll even take some of the stock that we like. Not a price we're prepared to give you. Because it's just a loss for you, just a write-off for you. So retrenchment, consolidation and retrenchment are just as important as acquisition and diversification, is knowing when to cut the loss before it becomes a big loss. And it's still a small loss. Cut it. So many share traders, very famous share traders, went bankrupt because of a strategy of averaging down. They were so attached to a company, to a stock, when the stock price dropped, they'd buy more. Buy the dips, buy, and then it drops further, buy, and then it drops further, buy, and you average. You average your investment down that way, and they went bankrupt because they got too attached. It's exactly the opposite. When it's dropping, it's a candidate for selling. So, in terms of novelty, in terms of growing our business, we want to develop products. So we can diversify, related diversification. For instance, we have a master's in cybersecurity. We have a master's in data science here at this in this department. Yeah. They're relatively new because that's what the market is asking for. I think we've rebadged and rehashed some old stuff and badged it up to fit, but we've marketed it into the buzzwords of cybersecurity and data science because that's where the growth is. That's what you should be doing, by the way. But that's another story. So that's related diversification. It can be expensive and high risk. It can require new resources and strategic capabilities. It comes with the typical project management, good execution. So for this department, I think they've done it with very low risk because they've rebadged capabilities that they've had, reused staff whom they've had in this area because they do good research, I'm sure, in cybersecurity, in data science, very strong statistics. Departments here within the faculty, so very low risk for them. It was a very, very good move. Market development. So it's existing products into new markets. So getting new users, new geographies, but you have to meet the critical success factors of those markets. What's really interesting, you would have seen this, other fast food chains, McDonald's, KFC, in some of the countries where you come from, I bet the menu is completely different to here. Is that fair to say? Yes. Because even though it's a multinational, even though they are doing market development, offering existing products to new markets, they know that they have to meet the CSFs of the market. They have to change the product to suit the market. So as a conglomerate, we can do unrelated diversification, and this is where the highest risk here. Potential costs arise because there's no obvious way to generate additional value. Why are you doing this? If it doesn't add synergy, if it doesn't give you a capability that you're missing, why are you doing this? And sometimes it's hard to fathom. For example, Apple invested $1 billion in a ride-sharing company in China called Didi. And Didi's been successful. Didi ousted Uber from China. Uber's not in China. That would be diversification and very unrelated. And you'd have to sit Tim Cook down and ask him, why the hell did you do that? There's a very interesting Netflix documentary inside Bill Gates. And he's quite remarkable, Bill Gates, the way he thinks and behaves. And I guess Steve Jobs, Tim Cook are of the similar ilk. That's the very creative side of strategy. So the diversification drivers, why? It's exploiting economies of scope, maybe, getting efficiencies. Here, using existing resources or competencies to new markets or services. We have that with our mining companies. Economies of scope. BHP, Rio Tinto, they're very clever. They've got an army of geologists. They know how to exploit resources, how to dig up resources. They understand automation. They understand how to dig up a resource and bring it to market. And so when they open up new mines right across the world here, it's economies of scope. It's stretching the corporate management competencies, their dominant logics, what prevails, applying these competencies across a portfolio of businesses. So they understand the commodity game. It's all about cost, exploiting superior internal processes and information systems there is something that's leveraged too because the IS embodies our processes. we can easily add another faculty in this university. All the processes will all streamline. It'll just be another checkbox radio button, for students to select subjects in this faculty. That's why the university has these crazy degrees. Arts, science, business, law, whatever. You can mix anything with anything. Does that reflect the world out there? I don't think so, personally. I don't think these blended mixed degrees reflects reality. An employer wants somebody with capability within a particular area, especially initially anyway, when you start your career. But what they're doing is exploiting their processes and their competences, their dominant logic. We know how to add more subjects, and we'll take our existing market here and we'll give them more choice. Whether it makes sense for them as graduates, well, they're out of our system then, and we don't really care. Increasing market power by mutual forbearance. Avoiding a price war with competitors. That's what they mean by mutual forbearance. So what you want is, we talked about game theory last session, and this folds in with game theory. And the idea being is that if you have a global competitor, then you're unlikely to engage in a price war, because it will trigger price wars right across the whole world. So you have an understanding, a standoff, say Ford and General Motors, and how they compete. They compete in a very civilized way. We used to have Holden and Ford as the number one and two vehicle assemblers in Australia, for example. And they would match each other with the models and the pricing, and neither would undercut the other. Just the features would be different. The style and look of the cars would be different. Because they're global competitors, Ford and General Motors. They know how to behave. The Japanese would be the same, Toyota and Honda. Honda takes a higher end, usually, compared to Toyota, And Suzuki may be lower and smaller, cheaper. Like Mitsubishi, smaller, cheaper compared to Toyota, but then Honda a bit more expensive. They have their ways of competing that each one says, okay, you can have that spot, we'll have this spot, and you can have that spot over there. It's game theory. It's to their mutual benefit. And that's what we mean by this mutual forbearance. That's why you extend globally to say, don't pick on us in any particular market. This could have global ramifications for you if you mess with us. So what you want is synergy. So 2 plus 2 equals 5. Otherwise it doesn't make sense to diversify, like the hospital here. It doesn't create any synergy. The idea of synergy in the medical school, but the research they do in the hospital is different to what they do in the research, and I don't think it's paid off in the way in which they were hoping or how it looked on paper. And they don't understand. It's not understanding the market. So we have, for instance, Royal Prince Alfred Hospital is attached to University of Sydney, and we have Prince Henry, Prince of Wales, attached to University of New South Wales. But that's for the students. That's for all the student doctors, the interns, to work as cheap labour in the hospital. It's terrible doing medicine, because you have 5 years of university and then a year of slavery, or a year or two of slavery as an intern, 80-hour weeks at very low pay, and it keeps our public hospitals running with these overworked students. And it's the same thing for the specialists. They are the registrars of the specialists, work as the assistants, students of the specialists to become specialists. They're called registrars here. So that's the idea of having the hospital attached. Yet that's not the model we're pursuing. I couldn't articulate the model that we're trying to. We have this School of Advanced Medicine, postgraduate for doctors, qualified doctors, to get an advanced degree, somehow with a research orientation, such that it somehow correlates with the research being done in the private hospital. But that's in the private hospital, they're looking at statistics and effective treatments, and it's very pragmatic research, not academic research. they're dealing with real-life patients. So they're not getting the synergistic effect. Hence, it's a huge liability. So there are value-destroying diversification drivers. So, for instance, Kodak got into huge trouble. So Kodak is famous for what? Cameras, but what sort of cameras?
Film cameras.
Not digital, no.
Film cameras.
Film. So yeah, the Kodak, not so much it's really, the Nikon. Kodak not really famous so much. It's the Instamatics, the cheap cameras, yes, but film. Kodak film. So do we use film anymore? Obviously not. So Kodak would have seen the rise of digital cameras, and then cameras incorporated in phones. Oh my goodness, that kills the digital camera market. And the latest iPhones got triple lenses. Yeah, but Samsung's had that for a while. So if you want to know what Apple's going to do next, you have to look at what Samsung's doing today.
Everyone's had it for a while.
Oh, I know. Apple always lags. They always lag, but that's anyway. That's another story. But so Kodak tried to diversify into printers, into cameras, when it was losing its photographic film market, but it couldn't handle the low margins of consumer products compared to the high margins that they had with film. Sometimes we want to spread the risk, but sometimes markets are correlated and you're not spreading the risk at all. And often it's just politics, managerial ambition, but all of these are value-destroying diversification. So this is actually a very difficult aspect of strategy because you're getting out of the expertise and competence of the organization. So if we look at performance and diversification, if we're undiversified, this is our base here, is our performance is at this level. If we do related, limited diversification, in other words, if we get synergy, it's something we know into new markets like BHP and Rio, into overseas mines. They know how to do mining, right? Or if it's Wesfarmers opening up Officeworks off the success of Bunnings, we know value, wide range. It's a hybrid strategy. Bunnings, Officeworks is hybrid, is both value but also quality in terms of availability of everything that you might possibly want. In some of the Bunnings stores are 2 levels. One in Chatswood, it's 2 levels. It's just amazing, the range of stock that Bunnings has. So the range gives it good quality. Same thing with Officeworks. Nothing in there is particularly cheap, but they have a huge range. You want a printer, and they've got dozens of them, So that is related, limited diversification. But here's the problem. If it's unrelated and extensively diversified, you're not getting the synergy. So we can integrate, we can vertically integrate, we can buy our suppliers that might give us extra value. We can, so where the organization's own supplier or its own customer, we can buy our wholesalers, which is not the trend. The trend is exactly the opposite, is more fragmentation. If we think about it as an example, with let's look at the car auto industry. For instance, they are assemblers. They actually don't make the components. There's a whole ecosystem of component, gearbox, engine, supplies, except Mercedes, for instance, here vertically integrated. AMG used to build the high-performance engines for Mercedes, and this was such a successful niche market, where the AMG version add, 20, 50 grand or whatever to the cost of the car. for the AMG engine, where this was such a clever niche segment, specialized segment, that Mercedes bought AMG. That's an example of vertical integration. But Mercedes doesn't own its dealerships. They're independently owned because these are salespeople. And Mercedes wants to focus on being an engineering company, engineering better cars. So backward development activities concerned with the inputs. So backward integration is vertical integration to your suppliers. Forward integration is vertical integration to your customers. It's their subsets of vertical integration, backwards or forwards. So again, based on the car, we have a car manufacturer. We can buy our components manufacturer, backward integration, Mercedes buying AMG. Or we could do forward integration, which they won't do, and that's or Apple does it. Apple creates retail stores. That's a forward integration. They want to control the part of the consumer experience. Although I wonder what proportion of Apple products are actually sold through their stores compared to through their reseller network, through all the telcos. Yeah, I wonder. So it's only part of the strategy. Flagship, maybe. More to do with marketing than actual distribution, possibly. To have a flagship stores. It is, yeah. Yeah, you can, yeah. You're right. So outsourcing is more the trend. Rather than integration is exactly the opposite, outsourcing, especially in the IT world. And that's why we love SaaS. SaaS is very much outsourced. We outsource the hardware, the infrastructure. We outsource the middleware. And we outsource the software. We outsource all three tiers with a SaaS application. A whole lot. I learned today it's completely outsourced. Macquarie didn't even. It's based on Moodle, an open source learning management system, and they have a private outsourcing company that hosts it for the university. Google is doing Gmail for student email, completely outsourced. So to outsource, does a subcontractor have the potential to do the work seemingly better? Certainly. Google can do the Gmail much better than Macquarie can do student emails. Risk of opportunism, that's a big problem. So in the early days, Apple used a contractor of the name of Samsung to build components for the iPhone 3, the original 3G iPhone. That didn't work out very well. Samsung saw how successful Apple was with a smartphone and soon developed their own. And they spent a decade suing each other for breach of patents. They seem to be a good Mexican standoff now because Samsung had that triple lens and now Apple has it. But I don't think Samsung is suing Apple. Nobody's going to be suing Samsung for breach of patent with their folding phone. Still not working all that well. But I give them full marks for innovation at least. Something different, something new, something exciting. I wish them well with their folding phone. But maybe it's a bit early days. So what activities can the parent do that adds value? Is envisaging, is establishing high-end strategies for the subsidiary companies, hiring outside consultants and giving them a different view, because you end up with a lot of bias, a lot of cognitive biases when you're working for a long time in one organization. You know, this is the way we do things around here. And you're not open enough to new ideas, trying new ideas. Facilitating synergies, putting together. So, for instance, I worked for a US multinational, and I was the managing director of the Australian subsidiary. And in this organization, what I particularly liked was the intercompany pricing policy. It was cost plus 10%. So that was very good. What it meant is that the manufacturing company in America, in Spain, in the UK, I sourced product from all around the world, they got their costs back, which is the loaded cost, fixed and variable overhead, plus 10% for their trouble in having to deal with me. So they didn't make much. But the idea was I could get product in cost effectively to try out a range of pricing strategies for the Australian market, offering a hybrid strategy, offering a high quality product at what was not a huge premium price relative to say, the Australian-made or the Taiwanese-made products that were, So that was very successful. So that's an example of facilitating synergies, because my sourcing companies previously had, say, distributors in Australia who were buying very little product from them, were not successful at all, but they were getting a better margin. So they didn't quite like it, the drop in price, but they soon got used to it when they saw the volume and the success. And the argument went straight back, no, he's making money in Australia, he's doing a good job, just keep supporting him. So that's where you needed a corporate, a parent company to facilitate that synergy. Coaching. Certainly the chairman of the company, he sent me round to Sweden and to Spain and to some of the smaller and stranger subsidiaries, and I saw how independent and autonomous they were and how clever they were. And it really did inspire me. That's what he wanted me to see, is just do it your way. Do it what the market requires. So coaching, providing central services and resources, and often that's the backbone IS system, the ERP system, and of course it's intervening too, where you're not profitable, and the Americans call it restructuring. And that usually means a lot of jobs are lost. That's what it usually means, restructuring. That's an intervention, because you are no longer successful in what you're doing. You need another way of looking at it, and it takes time to adjust the strategy, and they need to cut overhead whilst you go through this transition period, this restructuring. So intervention. So value destroying, though, adding management costs, adding bureaucratic complexity, and sometimes obscuring financial performance. That is, if there's a pet business unit, often they're not treated fairly in terms of cost allocation, and the more profitable business units are actually absorbing a lot of the cost from the small entrepreneurial ones. So sometimes we don't get this activity-based costing that we need. So the rationale can be the portfolio manager, can be the synergy manager, can be the parent. So the parent here with a portfolio, parent getting synergy, parent developing into business unit competencies. So in terms of these models, we want balance of the portfolio, balancing risk. That, okay, we've got some entrepreneurial divisions that could do spectacularly well but may not, but then we need some cash cows. The attractiveness of the business unit, and has to fit. So there's different matrices. So we've got the BCG, we've seen that before. Portfolio, we'll see that in a minute. A very famous matrix, 2x2 matrix. We've got General Electric's McKinsey directional policy matrix and the parenting matrix, different models here. So here's BCG. So we want this portfolio. Basically, what we're trying to develop is stars, high market growth and high market share. But you don't start off there. You actually start off as a question mark. You start off with a low market share but high growth. If you don't get the high growth with low market share, you're a dog. And you've got to eliminate dogs. But the question mark can develop into a star. The iPhone would be the example. But then the iPhone today is a cash cow. It's got negative growth. It's not growing at all, sales of iPhone. and eventually it will become a dog. That's the cycle. Goes around this way. So you have to be aware of where the products are in the portfolio, and you spend all your time on these, trying to develop them into these. It has. It's a cash cow today. In 10 years' time, it'll be a dog. Apple will no longer be dependent on the iPhone. Yes, correct. iPod's gone the same way. They don't sell many iPods, do they? Have they? There you are. So iPod would have gone the same way. Very good, Syed. Thank you for that. So BCG, there's their definitions. Yeah, well, direct definitional vagueness. How do you? I think we can. I disagree. I think you can tell which quadrant your business unit, based on its growth and based on its size. If it's big and growing, it's a star. If it's big and flat to decline, it's a cash cow. If it's small and not growing, it's a dog. If it's small but growing fast, it's a problem child. So I disagree. I think you can define which quadrant. Capital market assumptions, I'm not sure what that criticism is. Motivational problems, yeah, if you're defined as a dog, well, you know you're on your way out. Self-fulfilling prophecies, you call someone a dog, nobody's motivated to fix it, and self-fulfilling. And there can be linkages. For instance, HP printers might be dogs, but HP cartridges might be stars. You don't get the stars if you don't have the dogs, so there could be linkages. So this is much more complicated. And of course, because this relates to GE, and GE is very, very complicated. So we look at the size of the market by the size of the bubble, and we look at the market share of the strategic business unit. And what we want is a high market share in a big market, because these are big contributors. Big market share in a small market is less interesting, but then we need to look at what is the long-term market attractiveness here, and that's to do with the growth of the market. What are the demographics? What are the trends in the market here? So what we want is we want to get involved in attractive markets, but it has to be a big market, and we need to have a credible market share. So when we start mapping this, we see we've got a big market share here, but it's not a very big market, and this market's shrinking. It probably was this size originally, and now it's getting smaller. So we don't focus much attention here, especially when and especially if we're not very strong, although you've got definitional problems, because you've got a quarter of this market. I wouldn't think that you're weak to have a quarter of this market. So maybe this graphic is a bit inconsistent. How do you define the strength? But what you want is play to the strengths and play to the size of the market and gain the market share. But anyway, it gives you a snapshot of each business unit where it fits. Here. Afia, this is the answer to your question. If it's in this one, invest and grow. If it's in here, you've got to be selective. If it's here, you divest. See? That's so divest where you're weak and it's low attractiveness. Harvest and grow if you're strong and it's attractive. So there's a direction. Be selective here, Make sure there's synergy. And finally is the parenting matrix here. Which businesses do you want to own? Do you want to parent? So you need a fit between business unit critical success factors and parent skills, a feel. Do you have a feel for these businesses? So you want strong fit with. So BHP, Rio, investing in mines. We've got a strong feel for how to cost efficiently manage a mine. Then we want to fit between the business unit's parenting opportunities and skills, and the parenting skills, resources, and characteristics. So not only do we want a good feel, but we want to be able to add value. So add benefit. So not only do we know mines, but we can bring in the right equipment. So you need to have a liberal policy in the country that enables you to automate, to bring in equipment. Some countries might say, no, you can only use manual labor because we have a very, very big employment problem here. Then you can't add benefit because your strategy is automation. So even though it's a mine, you don't want a labor-intensive mine. So you will walk away. So because you can't add benefit. But where you can add benefit and where you've got a strong feel, these are your heartland businesses. Where you don't have a feel and you can't add benefit, what's it called? An alien business. So the private hospital, Macquarie Private Hospital, definitely fits alien business. They don't have a feel. They don't know how to manage. The management of this university does not know how to manage private hospitals. A good friend of mine, and he was a guest speaker in ITEC 832, John Sutherland, is the CIO of Ramsay Health Care. And he had to help them out with when they threw out all of their information systems because an audit found that they were dangerous to patients. They really don't know what they're doing. But Ramsay does. Ramsay's got 150 hospitals across 3 countries. It's I think Australia, the UK, and France. Anyway, they're a global company. Very large number of hospitals. They understand private hospitals. And what are the critical success factors? So they have a feel and they're able to add benefit. Well, this university doesn't have a feel and doesn't know how to add benefit. So it's an alien business. And these are ballast businesses that to sell, and this is a value trap, where it has high benefit, but you don't have a good feel. So it's a mistake. So Heartland, the parent understands these well, can add value to the core of future strategy. And that's like the different faculties in this university. They're Heartland. Ballast, parent understands these well, but can do little for them. They'd be more successful as independent companies, avoid corporate bureaucracy. So Wesfarmers got rid of Coles, got rid of the coal mines. Ballast. Value trap. They're attractive to add value, but the parents' lack of feel result in more harm than good. And alien, they're misfits. They offer little or no opportunity to add value, and the parent doesn't understand them. Exit is the best strategy. So it's a very clever matrix here, a very clever model, this parenting matrix, and we can apply it to the university quite easily. So some very interesting guidelines here on strategy and diversification, and I've given you some good real-world examples of how this comes into play. I really like Johnson et al. They're very practical text. They're Brits. Although strategically Britain's doing everything wrong with Brexit at the moment. So another important thing for growth is entrepreneurship and innovation. And this is very difficult to do because the enterprise grows by repetition, by doing what it does well over and over again, more and more and more and more and more. This university doubling in its number of students in the last 5 years. More and more and more and more and more. Yeah? That's how businesses work. And that stifles entrepreneurship and innovation because everybody's focused on more and more and more and more and more. And you get strategic drift, as we saw, until something happens. And either it changes or it dies. So it's very hard.
So, is there like a certain framework that usually companies can like go with in order to understand where the peaking point is? Or there's no such
Well, Porter's 5 forces model, by identifying the forces in your market. And when you see a strong force, such as the move to online as an example, the growth of MOOCs, you do what most universities are doing and you develop an expertise. We saw with the MicroMasters and edX, we saw University of Adelaide and Charles Sturt, and saw lots of Australian universities very actively involved, defending against this force, our substitution force.
So by coming
So-
expert in a bit.
So Porter's 5 forces, but when you identify the forces, then you have to respond by developing expertise in these areas, skill sets in these areas, so that you're not blindsided when this area grows, you grow with it. You have to self-cannibalize. You have to make your own products and services obsolete. That's part of this entrepreneurship.
What about swap?
Yeah, but then that's a bit superficial. So Porter's 5 forces, okay? That's how you model it, how you show it, and then you have to do something about it. It takes leadership. That's why this is an art. It's not science, it's an art. So entrepreneurship, we want entrepreneurship to drive innovation, and we want to diffuse the innovation. So we talked about Moore's chasm between the early adopters and the early majority, that a lot of innovation, like Samsung's folding phone, we're not going to get diffusion of that. It's not ready yet.
And it still has some problems.
Yeah, of course it will. Of course it will. But I admire the entrepreneurship.
No, but they did hit the market. Like it did kind of send a ripple of kind of competition. Between other
It will. But going back to Microsoft is the world's #1 company now. It's knocked off Apple. And if we go and look at Microsoft saw that the notebook market was getting very stale. It shook up the notebook market. How did it do that? The Surface, that's right, shook them up. And I've got a Yoga, but a Yoga is inspired by a Surface. A combination tablet, PC. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant concept because the iPads are very limited devices. The PC is very staid. But the Surface and things like the Yoga, you've got the touch screen, you've got the entertainment device. You know, I read all my books, I watch all my series. It's a superb entertainment device. It travels very well. But when I need to do some work, it's a real PC. And I can even, just because I'm very old-fashioned, I can plug in a mouse and do real work with it, just as efficiently as a desktop. Can't do that with an iPad. So that's how Microsoft developed innovation, very successfully so, in the PC market to continue to generate sales of Windows and Office and continue the paradigm and defend against Apple successfully so.
Samsung's DX.
No, what's that?
So they've actually developed it to make it look like a desktop.
Oh,
So you can also get the keyboard.
Just connect your phone through a cable to a monitor.
yes.
And it'll act as a desktop.
Oh, very good.
Got it here as a desktop.
Okay, very nice.
So then I just add the keyboard.
Yeah, they're very innovative. So that's innovation diffusion. And then we've got innovators and we've got fast followers, imitators, which is a legitimate strategy too. So in terms of strategic entrepreneurship, we want to combine the two. Strategy means it's competitive. Entrepreneurship means it's new. So for example, this university spends most of its earnings on research. What's being researched is in very obscure areas. The drive of the research is to get publications. And you publish when you have something new to talk about, but it's new because it's obscure. Nobody's interested in it. It's academic, literally academic. So that's not combining the two. We wouldn't call this strategic entrepreneurship because we want innovation, but we want it where it's important, where it makes a difference to people. The government of New South Wales is spending $750 million in grants to clean energy companies. And I was just reading one of the winners of the grant does something very strange. They compress gas. And I thought, how does compressing gas help with clean energy? So I read a bit more, and I discovered that with renewables, with solar, with wind, sometimes they produce excess energy for the grid that can't be used. So they use that excess energy to compress gas, liquefy gas, whatever it is, nitrogen probably, because the atmosphere is 78% nitrogen. So that would be the gas I'd choose personally. Liquid nitrogen, make liquid nitrogen, I don't know. Probably a range of gases. So make liquid nitrogen. Yeah, well, carbon dioxide, you'd never want to release it. That's carbon capture and storage, which nobody's really proven. What would worry me is carbon capture, storage, and then subsequent leakage and death. When the carbon dioxide makes its way out of the disused mine or aquifer or wherever you've filled, and it's heavier than air, and you can't breathe, it kills everything when it leaks. So carbon capture, storage, leakage, and death. Anyway, but what this company wants to do is use the surplus energy to compress gas, store the compressed gas in disused mines, and then when the grid needs energy, release the gas to drive turbines. So you have a turbine generator on top of the mine. So the mine, disused mine, gives you limitless, virtually limitless storage for all your gas cylinders or whatever it is you are using, and then you open up the cylinders, the gas immediately expands, that's release of energy, that energy can drive a turbine. That's rather clever, isn't it? Will it be successful? Who knows? But this is the example of the New South Wales government here having a strategy, something of use, and giving it to entrepreneurs to help with clean energy. So I love these ideas because our future cleaner world will be a combination of many, many different technologies and different concepts, all with the singular purpose of reducing our carbon footprint and preventing more catastrophic global warming than what we're headed for. So we have to commend Gladys for that, independently of Scott Morrison, who's a bit of a denier, climate change denier. So that's an example of strategic entrepreneurship. It's not just entrepreneurship, but it's novelty. That's what my third year students struggle with. I teach them the precursor unit of this one, ISIS 360. Technology management, we call it. No, we call this one, what do we call this one? We call it enterprise management. We call that one technology management. And they have to do a business plan, and they come up with novel ideas that are often useless. And I have to answer, so what? Of course it's novel, it hasn't been done, because nobody's interested in it. Nobody would want it. So you need this combination of entrepreneurship, but aligned with a strategy. So entrepreneurship is this process individuals, teams, organizations identify, exploit opportunities for new products or services to satisfy a need, and you have to be able to recognize the right opportunity here. So we want this center ground here where you have the resources and capabilities, where there is a gap in the market here, and you have the entrepreneurial team. And Ryanair, fits that beautifully of entrepreneurship. The entrepreneurial team is Michael O'Leary and his group of management, and it was done by Qantas by Alan Joyce with Jetstar, very similar. The trend and gap is holiday makers want to fly cost efficiently, but both low cost and efficient. We want it on time, take us there, and we don't want to pay a lot, and you need to have the right resources and capabilities. You have to design an airline ground up to drive out cost, so you can drive down fares. So, recognize the opportunity, do the feasibility, do the business plan, which is what you're going to do for your ITOs in your group assignment. Is everybody in groups? Hands up if you're not in a group. Oh, you got a job to do, don't you? Talk to the people around you and get onto the group selection tool and put your names down. Because you have to select an organization. You have to select an organization, and one person has to tell me how effectively they use IT, and the other three people have to do mini business plans for a novel use of IT. Sarah, Afia, you 15 minutes, please. Then we have our break. Okay, good. And so here's the process. Use that in your assignment. And what we need is stages here. We need startup capital. We have to grow. Then we be mature. Do we exit? And what we do is serial, new models, new improved versions continuously. So there are the stages in entrepreneurial life cycle. And in terms of strategies, the issue is you've got resource scarcity here. You don't have a lot of financial resources. You're relatively invisible. And organizations have these skunk works where they develop new ideas, knowing that most will fail. As well, we've got social entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs who do things, for instance, I can't remember the name of it. There's a Chinese mobile phone company that doesn't sell any smartphones at all in China, but has been very successful in Africa. The cost of the phones is very low, from around $20 to about $200, and it's localized in terms of language, and it works very well. In terms of charging, it works on very low voltages because they have lots of brownouts. And so, anyway, the features of the phones are very, very tuned to the African market. And that's like a social entrepreneurship, is meet the needs of the underprivileged. We see that with microloans, for instance, helping very poor entrepreneurs with some very small loans to develop local businesses, not for profit. So we have a social mission here. We need to have the right cooperative stakeholders, low cost, and we need a business model that adds value. So innovation, conversion of new knowledge into new product service, and putting this new product process service into actual commercial use. So innovation is more complex than invention. Invention's like the research we do here. It's something new, very nice, but is it of use? Will it get adopted by the market here? So we have this example of technology push or market pull. And in your first assignment was much more technology push. I said, think of a technology. Big data, AI, machine learning, IoT, blockchain. Think of a technology. Tell me about it. How did we get here? What was the journey? Which was interesting, wasn't it? To look at the journey, how we got here to where we are today. Tell me somebody who's using it effectively. That's pretty easy, really. But then the more difficult task here is make it work in your target organization. And it's particularly difficult because it's technology push. Pushing this technology into the organization. What is much more effective is market pull. It's like Tata's Nano car. It's like Aldi. Aldi's market pull. When the average consumer goes shopping, what are the two things they want? Quality and price. I want to buy good quality, low price. I love the specials. Those specials do very well. That's right. We don't want to buy rubbish at low price because that's really expensive because you have to throw it away. So that's market pull. Aldi understands market pull. H&M understand market pull. Women in particular like to be fashionable. Men were a bit more daggy usually, but some of us are fashion conscious, but less so than women. But women like to wear the good fashion, but don't want to spend a fortune. So fast fashion, fast and cheap. Understanding the market pull. Michael O'Leary and Ryanair, market pull. So your ITOs should be more responsive to market pull, not technology for technology's sake. So we want to innovate products sometimes, like the Samsung folding phone, because that gives you both a tablet and a phone in one device. You can have either and flip from one to the other seamlessly. It's a lovely idea. I think that's very innovative. Unfortunately, it doesn't work very well, but it's innovative. But we can also innovate process. And so e-learning is innovating the whole process of education delivery. Look at you, you're so restless. There's a few minutes to the break. You've been stuck in these uncomfortable plastic chairs. It's death by PowerPoint. We should be able to innovate this process. Oh, it's already been done. Learn when you're ready, as much as you want, when you want. Well, edX. Yeah, edX, the edX model. That's innovating the process of education delivery.
So during my high school years, we used something called Smartboard, where it was like more kind of board interactive learning for students.
Good.
But I don't know if that was, I don't know if it's as effective as.
I don't know either, but that's process innovation. Changing the process. So we can change the product, or we can change the process, or change both. Netflix changed the process, where you don't have to wait for the scheduled time on your TV program guide when it's going to air. And full of commercials, the process is different. I select whatever I want and watch it whenever I want, pay-per-view or streaming, right? But they've also changed the product. They make their own series. So they're both. Started off with process innovation, now it's product innovation. Yes, that's backwards integration, becoming the producer of the material. Yes, backwards integration. Very good, integrating with their supplier of digital product. They become their own supplier, absolutely. Yeah. So there's competition, there's limits to growth.
But then, like, when we come to decide what we want to watch, you have to go like, oh, okay, I have to subscribe to this service now.
But there'll be an aggregator. Maybe Apple will be the aggregator. We'll see. There's an opportunity to be an aggregator of all of these different services, and Apple is positioning itself, I believe, to be that type of aggregator, but we'll see. And so often there's product innovation and then process innovation, or one after the other. Innovation can be closed or it can be open. So Apple is very closed, very proprietary, very secret, very hidden, all internal. Lego almost died because of its closed innovation. It was making product that people, kids and adult builders didn't like until they opened it up and had competitions and forums and used the internet, and if there's enough demand they will make anything now. Kits for anything if there's enough demand. So open innovation. Saved Lego. So IBM has lots of collaboratories and there's a lot of crowdsourcing that can be done, which is a magnificent idea. GE It's all its patents available and says to the world, give us an application for our patents. Tell us how we can use it. And we'll give you a share of the profits. So if the competitive rivalry is very high between Samsung and Apple, it's better to be closed. Innovation can be one shot, but usually it's continuous, new, improved. So we have an endless stream of iPhones. And often we have tight linked innovation. So Apple do this very well. So Apple says they optimize the hardware and software to work in iPhones. And that gives them a competitive edge against Android, which is not necessarily, each different Android phone you use will have a slightly different experience with. So Apple uses this complex and tightly linked innovation model, which is why they can lag, because they do it well. When they execute well. So you can either be leading edge but have it a bit messy, or wait until Apple does it and we have more confidence that Apple will do it well. That's maybe the spiel. I don't know that I really believe it, but it does work for them. It's this complex and tightly linked. They invented. Steve Jobs invented the smartphone, and that was but he did the same too with the iPod in popularizing digital music, and it was his confidence with the iPod and putting the phone in the iPod. We got the iPod Touch after about the same time as the iPhone. I know the iPhone in America preceded the iPod Touch, but you can see the thinking that we'll develop sequentially the iPod, and then one day he got the idea, I'll just put a phone in an iPod, and it'll be an iPhone, and combine an iPod with a phone. And he's leveraging the app developers, because the app developers came first for iPod. When the iPod had the color screen and you could play games on the iPod.
It was like basic games.
Yes, it was, but he gave him the idea. So it was a sequential development, in my opinion. The iPhone just didn't suddenly appear. It was multi-generations of iPods where he just made the leap. And then he did the reverse leap. What was doing it in reverse? If you're adding a phone to an iPod, what's doing it in reverse? Take the iPod out. Take the iPhone, take the phone out of the iPod, and it becomes what? An iPad. So the iPad evolved from the iPhone because the iPhone was too small for a lot of the applications it was being used for. So people wanted a big iPhone. But gee, that would look clunky, wouldn't it? So his innovation was take the phone out of the iPhone and call it an iPad. That's all the iPad was a big iPhone. That's all it is today. A big-ass iPhone without the phone. So it was this complex and tight innovation, and it was sequential innovation. It didn't suddenly, that's when you say, was it a big risk? Not so much, because it evolved. It was evolutionary. He already cracked the nut in terms of iTunes and in terms of app developers, the iStore, the Play Store. What is it? iTunes. Yes. It was a sequential evolution which had made it successful. So platform here, and that's the example here of Apple, Microsoft creating a platform, and then you leverage that platform. You've got to ensure diffusion that the market, you don't want to drop into Moore's chasm here. So you need the innovation to get sufficient market share at sufficient pace. Otherwise you die. So what are the determinants of diffusion, of acceptance? It can be the degree of improvement. The more new and improved it is, the more quickly we'll adopt it. It can be compatibility. That's why plug and play. We love plug and play. Complexity, over-complex, slows down diffusion. Experimentation, we love the freemium model. You try it for free, and then if you really like it or you like the advanced features, you pay for it. That allows for experimentation. The SaaS model, in particular, allows for a lot of experimentation to try before you buy here. And could be relationship management, that if you have good relationship with your supply chain, then your product gets promoted well within the supply chain. Demand side here, the market awareness, the push campaigns, the marketing. Apple's very good at marketing. The network effect, that you're a bit left out if you're not on Facebook. And what is the customer propensity to adopt? So often it's the younger and wealthier consumers who are quicker to adopt, so you target them because they like something that's new and cool. So the diffusion is an S curve. It's sort of an S, so like an S, sort of a flattened out S, if you like. You asked about this tipping point, Syed. Here's another tipping point for you, that there's very slow diffusion, and you could end up with a dog on your hands, but all of a sudden it suddenly takes off, ramps right up, and then you've saturated the market, and then there's a tripping point where you're yesterday's news. So nobody paid any attention to the Kardashians. Then suddenly everybody wanted to look like the Kardashians, and now, who cares? Yeah? Yeah, could be. So here are the key things, is the timing of the tipping point, how long it takes to get adoption, how long does it take to plateau, how much market share did you actually get, and when's the tripping point. The trick is you create your own tripping point. You obsolete your own product. Then you are master of your own destiny. So the decision points, tipping and tripping. So we can have first mover advantage, like Apple with the iPhone. But then you can have, so Apple, so the first mover, you get experience, expertise. Tesla and electric cars. Scale, Tesla and the Gigafactory. Reputation, Tesla and Elon Musk. Preemption of scarce resources, buying up all the lithium for your lithium-ion batteries. And buyers get used to a Tesla and don't want to necessarily change brands that easily. So we can see the advantages of first mover. But the late mover can free ride. The Nissan Leaf can free ride on the innovation of others much more cheaply, and they learn by the mistakes. The Nissan Leaf is cheap. The Tesla is very expensive. A fast second can sometimes be effective. Samsung used to be a fast second to Apple. Now Samsung is leading Apple with the triple lenses and etc. First or second, it depends on the capacity for profit capture, on whether you can scale up. The innovator is unlikely to achieve whether it's a durable advantage or not. So there's various factors. So we have disruptive innovation, as we've seen, Uber, Airbnb. So we have the disruptor that completely changes. We go from technology 1 to technology 2. We go from cabs ringing up. You used to ring up for a cab, and when you'd ring up the taxi company, guess what would happen? Yeah, put you on hold. That's it. And then finally you'd get through and book a cab. When would my cab arrive? First available cab, sir. When would that be? Well, it might be an hour. Suck it up. So Uber completely changed that paradigm. An app, you can see where the Uber car is, you know who the driver is, what sort of car it is, what the rating is. Real innovation here at 2/3 the cost, half to 2/3 the cost of a conventional taxi. So how does Uber sustain innovation? Uber Eats, doing it for food here, and we've seen disruption in many different markets here. So how do you become a disruptor? You develop a portfolio of real options. What could happen? A scenario-based approach. Venturing, small innovative businesses like Gladys giving $750 million, 75 grants, I think there were $10 million grants, to lots of different companies, small investments, to see which one will be successful, and try to develop entrepreneurial activities within a large organization with a skunk works. And that's how we ended up with Java. James Gosling was working for Sun Microsystems, and he had an idea for a better computing language, and he went off with a skunk works, and they had to drink so much coffee to stay awake. The long hours they had spent to develop their new language, they named it after the coffee they were drinking. Java coffee, from the island of Java in Indonesia. That's an example of a skunk works, an entrepreneurship, but it's very rare to make them successful here. So we can have this portfolio of innovation options, and so it depends on the market. And so we love 2x2 matrices in management. So it depends on technical uncertainty and market uncertainty. If technically it's simple and we know the market, we just do enhancements. And that's all that Apple is doing with the iPhone. And as we said sarcastically, if you want to know what the next iPhone is going to look like, have a look at where the competition are today. Yeah? So all they're doing is enhancements. And you know the latest iPhone doesn't even have 5G capability. So they're really lagging Samsung. Why bother? We have 5G. Yeah, Telstra's got some 5G. If you had a Samsung phone, you could subscribe to it. But not if you have the latest iPhone, 11 what? 11 Pro. Pro Max, thank you. I'd forgotten. That's how interested I was. If it's medium uncertainty, medium technical uncertainty, try for a platform. If it's high technical uncertainty, try different technologies here. If it's both, then you need to fail fast and fail cheap with stepping stones. And H&M, fast, cheap. If something doesn't work, it disappears very quickly. Scouting options here, if it's high market uncertainty, but you know the technology, same tech, but try different markets. So an interesting overview of how to drive entrepreneurship and innovation. Is very much an art. But we see it very successfully done in Ryanair. So we're going to talk about Ryanair after the break. Now you've got your freedom.